Welcome to Talking in Common, a podcast of all things lifestyle, family, relationships, well-being, kids and culture. This is not a how-to, but an insight into the lives of ourselves and others and how we all manage to get by. Hosted by myself, Kate Gadinsky, and my co-host, Sophie Panton. Take a listen and let's find out what we all have in common. Why, thank you for joining me, Sophie.
Oh, my darling Kate, what an intro. So profesh. I love it.
Oh, well, you know me.
Putting your presenter hat on today, girlfriend.
I love putting on my presenter hat.
How are we? I'm excited for this today.
I am super excited too because we finally have a sexologist joining us on the podcast.
Who doesn't love talking about sex?
Let's talk about sex, baby.
Let's talk about you and me. I think we sang that song last time we talked about sex.
Yeah, I think we did actually. You're right. We probably need something a little bit more original. But we do have a great sexologist joining us today, and this is a topic that we have been talking about, sort of delving a little bit more deeper into for a while now. We asked a lot of our listeners on Instagram what you wanted us to chat more about, and this was a very common topic.
Yeah, not surprising. We want to know too. We want to know all the ins and outs. No pun intended, maybe pun intended.
The ins and outs.
Yeah, we did do a little question thing on Instagram recently, and the most popular episode topic was everything around sex. And I think all of us in our Talking in Common community here are in a very similar boat. We're either mums or dads or trying to conceive or pregnant or, somewhat in the maternal phase of our lives. And so much changes around sex and sexuality and sexual interest and sexual desires and everything to do with the sex, needs, wants, once you have kids or once you've experienced pregnancy. So, I mean, Kate and I could just share our sex stories, but we thought that it would be much more.
Off you go. Tell me, what happened in your most recent sexual encounter and when was it?
No, we're not going there just yet. Wait till we get into our chat with Aleeya.
Well, we should start off though with what we have in common because we seem to be getting a bit too ahead of ourselves.
All right. What do we actually? I'm frantic today. Are you? You seem calm.
Yeah, I feel pretty good at the moment. I was a bit frantic this morning. I definitely don't think I'm as frantic as you today. You're like a headless chook over there.
Doing my usual thing, way too many things. I actually was literally overcommitting, yeah. I literally was just having a little giggle and reflection of myself before because yesterday I took Honey and little baby Ren to the playground on our way home from somewhere. And, I'm still adjusting to having these two children being my own my sole responsibility when I'm out with them. And, of course, Ren needed to be fed at the same time that Honey was desperate to get outdoors. It was a beautiful sunny day and she was desperate to get outdoors. So I'm that mum walking around the playground like one child hanging off my boob and like trying to help the other child on the swing. I know.
Lifting up Honey. And usually right when you have to breastfeed when you're out in a public place like that, that's always when the toddler demands your attention. I mean, toddlers pretty much demand attention all day, every day. They're little bosses, little boss babies.
But, any other mums out at the playgrounds with their boobs out breastfeeding, like holler at me. I'm with you.
I think you just like showing your nipples. You've done it that many times on the podcast this season.
I know. Actually, I had to ask our guy that puts the videos together, like, can you blur out any nip slips? Thanks. Sorry, breastfeeding again.
So if there have been any nip slips, there were actually originally a lot more. We've just had to blur them out.
Yeah.
No, I think I know what we've got in common though.
Yeah.
You're
not nip slipping.
I'm definitely not no nip slipping here. So recently my daughter Lulu has been having a really difficult time at kinder drop-off. It's been incredibly stressful, really distressing. It's come out of nowhere and she literally just screams and gets so upset. She's fine, right up until we kind of start to walk in to the little play area heading into kinder and it's really out of character for her. Anyway, we're slowly coming out of it, but
thank God. For anyone that doesn't know.
It's apparently fine as soon as we leave though. So it's not like she's staying distressed.
For anyone that doesn't know Lulu's age or your situation, give a little overview of that because I'm sure everyone's in the same
Yeah, my daughter Lulu is 4, and yeah, she's not normally like that. She is very mummy and has been very clingy at the last kind of few months, but it is very unlike her to get upset when I leave. So fingers crossed we're coming out of this phase now, because any parent who has been in the same boat, and I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot.
Yeah.
It is really stressful and you feel so guilty and so bad leaving them. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to, because you can't just take them home every time they get upset. They'll never want to go. But I know that she has a great time because I get updates, I get pictures, I pick her up. She's as happy as Larry.
Yeah. Yeah, well, other friends of ours with 4-year-olds have said similar things, haven't they? And Honey's not quite 3, but I've been going through a similar thing with her recently. And up until, and it could be since we've had the new baby, but up until this point, Honey was the same. She's been so happy to be dropped off at childcare and never really fussed about it. Until recently, she does the same thing. She clings onto my neck like a little koala and she cries and she says, I want to stay home, Mummy, I want to stay home. So, yeah, we definitely have that in common. I'm with you on that. But a little bit the same. She hasn't done it this week, actually. This morning when I dropped her off, she was easy. So, yeah, fingers crossed that we're both getting through the phase together, because it's awful.
I hope part of it wasn't to do with me talking on the phone to you on loudspeaker in your car, not realising Honey was in the back. And not only did I swear about 5 times, I also told her everything that Lulu had been doing at kinder drop-off, all of Lulu's little, things that she says and words that she uses when she doesn't want to go. And then apparently as soon as we get off the phone, Honey used one of those little, not sayings, one of those, what do you call it? Phrases. Phrases. For herself when she got to kinder. So sorry about that, babe.
No, it was very funny. I think you were saying like Lulu won't let me go, or she screamed, or she won't go to kinder, or
the sore tummy.
Yeah, that's what it was, the sore tummy. Yes. And then as soon as we hung up the phone, little Honey in the back goes, Mummy, I go, sore tummy. And I was like, oh God, she knew exactly what we were talking about. So funny. So yeah, any parents doing the same thing and going through that stage, we hear you loud and clear. It's a rough one. Do you and Mackie debate about who gets to do the drop off compared to the pickup? Because I always say to Aiden, it's not fair he does the pickups. I'm like, it's not fair. You get beautiful little running into your arms, Daddy, so excited, and I get don't leave me, Mummy.
I have to say, the couple of weeks where it was really tough, I did when Mackie could do it, I did kind of get him to drop her off, because I feel like it's a lot harder for me. And
subtly put, babe. Yeah. You mean you absolutely refused and made him do it. And then I did kind
of go on to tell him that consistency is the key, so you better keep doing it. But no, there was definitely days in amongst those weeks that I was doing it as well. And yes, I was lucking out on a lot of the pickups, which is the best time, because she's so happy. She's like, oh, hi, Mum, excited to see me. But it's like, you were devastated when you left me this morning, telling me you didn't want to go, and you've clearly just had the best day ever.
Yeah.
But it is nice seeing them all happy in the afternoon. And
yeah. And they are being well looked after. It's totally fine. It's just all part of their development, I'm sure.
Anyway, enough about toddlers. I'm ready to talk about sex. So should we introduce our guest?
Yeah, let's. Well, just to add to a little bit more about the reason why we're talking about this, I mean, maybe we already mentioned it and I'm repeating myself, but yeah, we did ask a few more questions on Instagram, to you guys. What are you interested in? What do you want to know? How do you feel? Where are you placed? And we actually had the biggest contribution to any of these Instagram question boxes that we've ever had. So we were like, okay, there's definitely something here to be spoken about. And of course, you and I, as friends, talk about this sort of stuff between us. But, again, we're here being part of a community and trying to create a community that has a really open narrative around everything to do with parenting and the transition and relationships and, generally being happy and healthy and balanced. And sex, I think, has a huge role to play in that. And we're going to go into all sorts of different, meanings of sex when we speak to our wonderful guest, Aleeya. But, you and I are both at very different stages in our life too. I only had a baby 4 months ago, so sex looks very different to me than it did a year ago, and even 3 years prior to having any kids at all. So yeah, I'm so here for it.
Yes, me too. All right. Well, our guest today, Aleeya Hachem, is a sexologist, and she's also a fertility counsellor who is passionate about normalising the conversation around sex, pleasure, and fertility. This is a topic that we know, as mentioned before, is of interest to so many parents, and we can't wait to hear all about it. Enough of me talking. Let's talk to Aleeya.
Aleeya, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. How are you?
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm well. I'm tired, but I'm good.
Yeah, just having a discussion about sick children.
Yep,
never-ending sick children.
Yeah, we've all been there. We hear you.
So, Aleeya, can you share with us and our listeners a little bit more about the work you do as a sexologist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a sexologist and a fertility counsellor. So I do my work across both, but my work as a sexologist is predominantly in the scope of fertility, as well as pregnancy and postpartum as well. So it's kind of the work that I specialise in, but I also work closely with our pelvic floor physios at our clinic, AISSM. So I deal with a lot of female sexual pain or female pelvic pain, and a lot of low libido stuff as well that I see too.
We were just saying before that sexology has, and it's probably got a lot to do with social media, but like it's a much more common thing now, and there's a lot more resources and a lot more people to be able to see and sort of tap into this industry. Is it like a new thing, or is it because of social media, or like what exactly is sexology?
Yeah, I think social media has definitely highlighted it and spread the word about it. I don't necessarily think it's a relatively new field, but there are a few key players in the industry that have made it normalized, I guess you could say, and made it accessible to so many different people. Essentially, to answer your question, sexology it's kind of like the scientific study of sexuality, okay? Or like we say, psychology is the scientific study of human behavior. Sexology is kind of like that and basically encompasses the psychological, emotional, sociocultural ways that our sexuality can be impacted. And it has a huge medical grounding as well that not a lot of people really consider. I think there's a bit of a myth that sexologists usually just talk about sex positions all day.
They're just like really good at having sex.
Yeah. Or they're having heaps of sex. Yeah. Which is one that I hear a lot. But, it's kind of like a medical degree. So, I think it shows that there's a little bit of validity in what we do. I guess
no doubt.
Yeah.
So when and why are some of the main reasons that someone would go and see a sexologist?
A whole host of reasons.
Yeah.
Sex education, would you believe, is one of the most common ones because we don't get taught about pleasure at school. We don't. There's so much that we don't learn about in school. Sex education primarily focuses on not getting pregnant or not getting an STI and how heteronormative sex exists, right? That's what we learn in school. And so, learning about pleasure, learning about anatomy, if you're experiencing pain, seeing a sexologist to get, and you can see that a pelvic floor physio to deal with the physical aspect of it, but working on the emotional aspect of it, or your attitudes and beliefs around sex, how you were brought up, how does that influence how you have sex, or your attitudes and beliefs around it. You could be experiencing issues in relationships. My partner has a higher sex drive than me and I don't, or there could be so many issues across that. Some of the most common ones I see are we've been trying to conceive and we're just really struggling, or I am struggling with my identity while I'm pregnant to have sex with my partner, or postpartum, what is sex? I guess you could say in that period. And so there are so many different reasons, but yeah, I try to work across all of them, really.
You mentioned before that a lot of your work and focus and passion is around fertility and a counselling around this as well. What was it that made you take that path?
I've always had a really big interest in fertility, babies, pregnancy. My first No, my second preference when I left school was to be a midwife. Because I didn't think I'd get into my first preference, the psychology. So I've always had a really keen interest in that. And then when I did my master's in sexual medicine, I majored in reproductive endocrinology and infertility, which is essentially a course for fertility specialists or medical professionals who want to get that fertility accreditation. And a lot of the work that we did in the fertility subject or in that fertility core unit, I guess you could say, none of it's focused on sex, which I thought was mind-blowing because you have sex to get pregnant.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a little baby in the background.
That's me.
I was like, that's definitely so tiny baby.
That's me and my mum in the background.
Oh, okay.
Speaking of
will the recording pick it up?
Yes. Okay. Don't worry. There's many baby sounds in our recordings these days.
He's heavily featured in season 3, little baby Ren.
He's on my boob half the time.
That's amazing. How good, though, that we've got a job that we can do that. Yeah, so none of it focused on sex, which I thought was mind-blowing because we have sex to get pregnant. But, the impact of sexual functioning on fertility was rarely discussed. But if you've got sexual pain and you're not having sex with your partner, how do you think you're going to get pregnant, right? Or if your partner has erectile dysfunction, how does that going to work? And so I was really interested in marrying those two concepts together and sort of making it my niche because I wanted to normalize the conversations around fertility as well as the conversations around sex.
So we do want to talk a little bit more about that later on, but before we do, we asked our audience on Instagram, has your sex life changed since having kids? And not surprisingly, 100% out of 154 people that answered all said yes.
Yes.
So there's definitely a conversation here to be had. What are some of the most, I guess, common things or issues that you see with couples after having babies? And, can we talk, I guess, about the impact that pregnancy and parenthood has on our sex lives?
That is such a big question. Where could I begin? I think
so there's kind of a few little questions in there.
I know. Well, my baby is almost a year, so she's almost a toddler. So I've been through it. I've experienced it. You can just hear her crying in the background. I think, pregnancy changes us. And by us, I mean the partner carrying the pregnancy from a physiological perspective, but also an emotional perspective as well. Some people may have experienced birth trauma, right? Or some people may have pelvic pain following their pregnancy, depending on the type of birth they had. The impact of stitches, episiotomy, it could be forceps, it could also be prolapse as well that occurs. So that there's that element, the sexual pain or the trauma associated with the birth. Could also just be low libido or like sex is the last thing on your mind, right? Because suddenly you've been given a tiny human and you have to care for them 24/7. So if you're nursing, particularly, your body is like wired to protect that baby. Anything else that is a distraction will literally be closed off biologically because we want to keep that child alive, right? So I think not a lot of people understand the biological impact that pregnancy can have from a hormonal perspective on literally shutting down your sex drive. Because if you want to, why would you have sex and get pregnant again? Because then you'll neglect your current baby. So it's shutting it down. It's making you sort of nest and look after your little one. But then, you're sleep deprived, you're nursing, so you're probably feeling touched out. You're like, go away to your partner. I can't deal with you right now. Your partner
can't have anyone else touching me right now.
You might want to murder your partner like I have done sometimes. So there are so many different reasons why I guess pregnancy and postpartum, in fact, impact on sexual functioning. But also as well, you're a mother now. And I think society definitely has an expectation around what motherhood should be for women especially, or for femmes, because sometimes motherhood and sexuality are seen to not coexist. It seems to be a very exclusive thing. You're a sexual being or you're a mother. And so I think as well it can be quite conflicting for a lot of women too.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because this is one of the things that I was saying to Kate the other day, not to, overshare, get too personal, but I see myself as very different from a sexual point of view now that I'm a mother. So my partner and I used to have a type of sexual relationship, and now as like mum and dad, it's very different. And that's not to say it's not enjoyable or it's, you know, it's better or it's worse, but it's so different. It's something that we did not consider before we had kids. And it's kind of like a weird field to navigate, you know, like do you still do the same things before, but yet you're kind of like seeing them as like dad and mum, you know? It's a weird combination, but I think I'm sure it must be common.
Definitely. I mean, you're leaning into those roles of mum and dad. So you see your partner differently. Like you see them singing play school songs.
All right.
A completely different light. And, you know, while that can be really endearing, sometimes it's not that sexy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what was I also going to say?
Like you're going to go from like singing play school songs to like pushing me up against the wall. Like, I don't know. It's a bit of a
baby screaming in the background.
Yeah, your baby screaming in the background. Like, do you let them scream? Because like, but logistically, how do you have sex with a child? You know, if they're in your bedroom and you really like having sex in your bed, like, would you like kick your child out?
Yeah. Kate asked me about that yesterday. She's like, do you find it weird when the baby's in the room? I was like, not as weird as you with your dog in the room.
The dog on the bed.
Dogs like know what's going on, I swear. Do you know, I'm at obviously a different stage, but I even find like it's, you know, very rare that you'll be trying to do the deed when, you know, the middle of the day when you've got young kids. But anytime my kids are happily occupied and the odd time we might sneak off to try and do something, with literally in 2 seconds I hear little footsteps coming down the hallway. I'm like,
it's like they know.
What? Like, oh my God. Give me 2 seconds. Anyway, they do know. They're very intuitive young kids.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know how you'll answer this from your perspective, but how important would you say that sex is for a relationship?
I think sex is important, but I like to reframe it as how important is intimacy for a relationship.
Yes.
Because there will be times in your relationship where sex just isn't a thing, like postpartum, like, you know, a death of a loved one, like a redundancy, you know, life happens. And that can impact sex, right? Or the penetrative sex that we normally see as our definition of sex. I think if we reframe it as intimacy, I think it's incredibly important for a relationship. Like it's vital because it's connecting with your partner on a physical level, but also an emotional level as well. Shows your partner that you love them. And it differentiates, you know, a housemate from an intimate partner.
True.
Yeah.
A lot of our audience obviously are mums or parents who are busy and time poor. So let's talk about the concept of scheduling sex and the pros and cons that can come with this, because I was reading about this recently and it's never been something that's crossed my mind to do it. And I asked Soph the same question. I was like, have you ever scheduled sex? And she hasn't. Oh, you said, have you? No, you haven't done it. You haven't.
No, but I like the idea of it. And again, we did the same thing and asked our audience on Instagram, and quite a few, most people had said no, they hadn't, but quite a few people answered and said no, they hadn't, but they think it's a good idea. Yeah, open to it.
Yeah. I think the idea of scheduled sex is that it's a type of sex that isn't sexy. Or it's like there's an idea that sex should be spontaneous.
Yes.
But when is sex spontaneous? And if you rely on sex to be spontaneous, you'll never have sex because it can, like, if we're waiting for a particular condition to be met to have sex, like I have to be in the right mood, I have to be clean, I have to, you know, not have a full tummy, whatever it is, I think, you know, you're going to be waiting a while. Yeah, you're going to be waiting a while to have sex. And so scheduling sex, I think, let's reframe it into a positive way. Let's see, firstly, I think rather than rescheduling or scheduling sex, let's make it scheduling intimacy. Okay. And if sex happens, great. If it doesn't, let's remove the pressure. Okay. And let's just have a really good time with our partner. If it means that you've got children and, you know, you can leave the children at your parents' place or with a sitter, it's time to just connect again and to step into the couple that you once were before you had children, you know, without mum and dad, without those roles being attached to it. And then, you know, in terms of worrying about being turned on for that event or for that schedule, I think, like, again, see it as a build-up, see it as a slow burn, give it conscious time and thought, think about you know, your partner. Think about all the things that you might like to try. Give it a little bit of airtime, because we can't just not think about it and then enter a sexual situation and be like, right, I'm turned on. It just doesn't work. We need to add fuel to the fire, essentially, and make it like a little bit of a slow burn.
Yeah. It appeals to me a lot more. It appeals to me a lot more when you talk about just kind of having been intimate or connecting with your partner or spending time together. That's kind of uninterrupted time, rather than, okay, we've got this time scheduled and we have to have sex. Because as you said, that can be so much pressure, and it's not guaranteed that you're always going to be in the mood. But obviously having that time together kind of makes sense, because then you're going to be connected, and then you're probably going to want to get intimate with your partner.
You probably just end up doing it anyway, right?
You
know that it's kind of like, that's a spontaneous element.
Yeah.
You may or may not do it. There's a bit of unknown.
But you might.
My initial thought, like when you propose that idea in your mind, like scheduling sex, like your immediate reaction is like, that takes all the fun out of it.
Yeah.
But the more I thought about it, I completely agree with what you were saying, Kate. Like, I think, and for the stage that I'm in at my life right now, where, you know, my partner's at work a lot, we're both busy, we're both really tired, we've got a new baby, all of those things that are almost like little negative marks against your sexuality or your sexual relationship. Dedicating a bit of time each week just for like intimacy sounds really enjoyable. Like, that sounds great, rather than just like sitting on the couch at the end of the day when we finally got both kids to bed, watching a show that none of us really care to watch, and then going to sleep. Scheduling some time just to be with each other, and if the intimacy ends up just being a really good conversation or a massage, or, you know, bonus points if you end up having sex, like, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Board game, wine, cheese.
Yeah, just
together,
basically dedicating time to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you're looking at it a little bit differently, then it makes a lot of sense, especially for new parents, or, you know, parents in general.
And if you're tired, you know, don't see it as like you need to do it for a couple of hours. Just half an hour, even a couple of times a week, is enough to make you feel like you're connected to your partner. And then if you want to plan like a special date night, you know, once a month, whatever's actually achievable, because you don't want to put these unrealistic expectations on, you know, on scheduling sex. You know, or figure out what you can actually achieve first and foremost, and then kind of work your way around that and incorporate it that way.
Yeah. Do you still get asked the question, like, how many times a week is normal to have sex?
All the time.
Yeah.
There's like the average, I think, is like 1.2 times a week, but that's for like a couple who are young who don't have children.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's still quite low anyway. Let's focus on quality, not quantity. Definitely. You know, if it's once a month but it's really good sex and you really enjoy it, that's fine.
I find like we go through phases as well. Like sometimes you'll have lots of sex and sometimes you won't have sex for a little while, and then you'll be back on it again. Like it changes all the time, I've found.
Definitely.
Depending on what stage you're in and what's happening in life.
Absolutely.
What about for you, Aleeya? Like, you're a new mum yourself, so you're navigating the same field that we are. How has the transition for you been with your sexual relationship with your partner, or even with your sexual relationship with yourself since having a baby?
It's taken an absolute downturn. And I think I put pressure on myself as well, because I'm a sexologist. I should know all the things that I need to do. You know, I'm like my worst client, right?
It's like a chef that eats Macca's for dinner.
It's literally the last thing on my mind, and we have been dealing with constant sickness. It's like, I am struggling with my new body. I'm struggling with my identity around what sex used to be for me, and how I can, you know, make it my own, I guess, in this new phase. And I think it does get easier as the child gets older and you're settling into your new roles. But I've really struggled with it. And wrapping my head around it and trying to fit it in and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people find comfort in hearing someone like you say that. Like, makes me feel better about myself.
Oh my gosh. And the pain, like, I wasn't prepared for the pain following childbirth.
Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I had a really easy birth. Like baby just slipped out, which was great.
Oh my God, amazing!
I have an amazing obstetrician. Like, hats off to her.
Yeah.
But and I had been seeing a pelvic floor physio my whole pregnancy, and even postpartum. I got it checked just to make sure that I wasn't having a prolapse, because like, oh my God, like the feeling down there afterwards. But yeah, I think the pain as well that comes with, you know, the first couple of times is really brutal. And a lot of people aren't prepared for that. There can be this expectation that, like, right, the baby's out, we wait 6 weeks, great, we're good to go. It's not always that way. You know, physically you may not feel ready, emotionally you may not feel ready. But the pain is there because, you know, particularly if you are nursing your baby, again, you're going to experience hormonal changes to the wall of the vagina. You're not going to be as lubricated. There's going to be some thinning or some degeneration of the tissue, because essentially you have the same hormonal profile as someone in menopause. Right. And a lot of people don't know that. They're like, oh, like, I've got pain.
I didn't know that until you just said that, actually.
No,
neither.
Yeah. So a lot of women in perimenopause and menopause do experience lack of lubrication and some atrophy of the vaginal wall. And so, it's a really common thing at different phases of the lifespan, I guess you could say, you know, after you've had your child and then later in life. And so seeing someone like a sexologist, seeing someone like a pelvic floor physio, or even your obstetrician or your gynecologist, to sort of get some knowledge around that, and then ways to overcome that as well. And also, you're not alone. You're not an outlier for experiencing that pain. It's really common.
Yeah, interestingly, that we were speaking to someone else recently on the podcast, and they very openly shared some conditions that they had after the birth of their first child, and they didn't know that these conditions even existed or that they were even a thing, but she was experiencing a lot of pain having sex after birth and wasn't guided in the right direction by her GP and had to go and sort of figure it out herself, but found out that she had specific conditions that were causing the pain, and, you know, she just didn't know to talk about it. No one else was talking about it.
It took her years to find them, didn't she? To find out what it was, I think she said.
Took her years to find out. Yeah, I think that's right. Took her a long time to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
And it just even made me realise, like, you know what, it's a bit uncomfortable for me after this baby, and maybe just because that seems like maybe it's normal, it doesn't mean we all have to suffer in silence, just thinking that it's normal and not, you know, not wanting to complain about it or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's resources, there's people to help, there's things to do.
Yeah, we need to talk about it more as well, because you know, it's not tend to be something that often we talk about amongst friends, and then it becomes this kind of like taboo topic that I don't want to say that it's painful for me to have sex after I've had a baby. So I think it's great that people are starting to be a little bit more open with these types of conversations.
Yeah. Or it's important to know that, you know, it can be normal to experience some discomfort, but then when is it really painful? When is it a concern? When should you go see someone? When does it become a really bad issue? So knowing that there is help available for it, I think, is really important. So, you know, it's having me on your podcast so that other people can learn where to go and get help if they need to is great. Let's normalize the conversation around it.
Totally.
We did touch on low libido before, or you mentioned it before. What are some of the main causes for men and women of low libido? And, you know, how much of this is sort of due to things like mental health and stress?
Yeah, I think libido is so multifaceted. There is that physical element, you know, or hormonal level, and the way that can impact on our libido, but there's also the emotional impact as well. You know, if we're talking about postpartum or even pregnancy, our hormones change, you know, they're plummeting. So the last thing, you know, so from a hormonal profile, what makes you have libido is testosterone or androgens. They stay male hormones, but, you know, females and males have them as well. But that is a main contributor to libido. And after we have a child, even male androgens or even male testosterone drops. Would you believe it takes on?
After we push the baby out,
they get estrogen.
However you give birth, there's lots of different ways, but then the males, that's
they
interesting.
Lose their testosterone too, and a lot of people don't know that. And so their libido might drop from a physiological perspective as well. but then also mental health. You know, a lot of people don't talk about postnatal depression in men, but it's 1 in 10, and not a lot of people talk about that. And even, you know, women, you know, it's like, oh, baby blues, but some people, baby blues doesn't go away after day 3 to 5, and it can stick around. And mental health is huge. You know, if you're anxious, your body literally doesn't have the space to experience sexual arousal and desire because it's in survival mode.
Yeah.
Talking about postnatal depression or cases like that, pre or postnatal, we had a couple of questions from our audience about that and taking medication for it related to sex drive as well. So I suppose that's another, you know, huge consideration. If people are struggling with postnatal depression, they're either just struggling with that alone, but then medication on top of that can really decrease our libido and sex drive as well, right?
Yeah, there are certain medications that they prescribe in the postnatal period for, you know, depression and anxiety. And, you know, they give them if the parent is nursing because, you know, it's validated, it's tested, it's what they know. And more often than not, those traditional medications that they've done the research on do impact sex drive, whereas some of the newer ones that have come around don't, but they haven't been tested.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to have a discussion either with a psychiatrist or the person prescribing your medication so that you can express that, you know, my libido is taking a downturn. It could be a number of factors, but can we try and exclude medication from that?
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to ask, let me say that again.
Those noises.
Sorry.
So foreign.
I think I'm such a multitasker.
One of the things that I was interested in asking you, since we've been speaking so much about what the landscape of sex looks like after you have kids, and a lot of women, I think, are feeling like they have no sex life anymore since they've had kids, and then as well like low libido and, you know, maybe postnatal depression or anxiety, all of these things that are contributing to why as women and men we're potentially not having as much sex once we have kids. A lot of our audience answered that they still want to have more sex in their life. They still desire it, but they just don't physically want to have it. So what would you say to those people?
Yeah, absolutely. That, you know, I think that's really important to acknowledge that just because you don't feel like it, you can still want it. And I think by still wanting it, it shows that, you know, you're in the relationship.
Still got it?
Still got it. And there are ways around it. Like I would always recommend getting blood tests, checking your hormonal profile, seeing what you can address. You know, maybe you just need more iron, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you've lost blood in childbirth and you're just super tired and you need an iron infusion, and then maybe you're back on again. Like, let's just see what your body needs. Let's fill it up that way, and then we can work on those emotional factors. Because if you don't have the bare minimum, if you don't have your physical self in the right space, it can be really challenging. But then also let's take it back to intimacy, right? You know, just because you want, I think, is it sex or is it closeness? Is it sex or is it connectedness? Your partner,
actually,
or is it just feeling like, you know, you're in a relationship without a third member or a fourth member tagging along all the time? You know, I think let's actually figure out what you want and how we can make it happen. And that's when it's like seeing someone like a sexologist can be really handy, because we can sort of understand the biological aspects that impact, but then also we can help you get your libido back. We can determine what your turn-ons are, what your turn-offs are, and how you can incorporate that into sex with your partner.
Do you often find couples, you see a lot of couples who have maybe different sexual desires?
Desires or drives, do you think? Which one? Or both?
Sorry, probably both. But, you know, who might not have, let's say, like great communication, and they might both want really different things in the bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You're not your partner and you're not a mind reader. And I think a lot of people just expect their partner to know what they want.
Yeah.
And then you're just going to end up disappointed because they have no idea what goes on in your head and you have no idea what goes on in their head. And so I think, you know, sexual communication is really important.
Yeah.
But I do acknowledge that the hardest person to talk about sex with is the person you're having it.
And the worst time when you're having sex is like the worst time to talk about sex, right?
Yeah, don't talk about it in the bedroom. To talk about it in neutral ground, definitely. I do a lot with patients about sexual communication because no one teaches you how to talk about sex.
No.
Particularly with a partner.
Yeah.
And all the things that you don't consider. Right?
Yeah.
Like for some people, sex can be really shameful. And so to talk about it with a partner, you know, you could be bringing up a lot for yourself, but you could also be worried about offending them or, you know, what they might say back to you if you express a desire that that you feel shame around.
Yeah.
And so, talking about sex is really important, but know that it can be really awkward and it can be really uncomfortable.
And not in the moment of when you're doing it.
Don't do it in the bedroom, no. Don't do it when you're naked. Don't do it when they're inside you either.
So what about, talking about incorporating sexual pleasure as part of self-care? Because self-care is sort of something that Soph and I have talked about a lot on the podcast, but we've never kind of really looked at, I guess, sexual pleasure as being a part of our self-care, but it makes so much sense. I'd never considered that before.
Sex is self-care, yeah. Self-care is such a buzzword.
Isn't it?
It's like, self-care, but like self-care looks so different for everyone.
Yeah, it's changed since having kids too.
Yeah, but it's actually so important when you have, like, it just makes you such a better parent and such a better partner if you have those moments of self-care. And self-care looks different for everyone, right?
That's why we talk about it so much, because it's changed a lot since we started talking about it compared to how we consider self-care now. A lot of it being much more mental now rather than just like physical.
Yeah, mine is like getting a pedicure. That's like my self-care.
Yeah.
You can sit in the massage chair and then like your feet, you like don't need to like talk to anyone. But yeah, it depends on your priorities, right? I think figure out if it's important to you, if sexual pleasure is a priority to you, and then absolutely figure out how you can incorporate it into your self-care routine. And it can be private to you, it can be on your terms. Your best sexual partner is you. Okay.
Yeah.
And also I think it's really important, particularly after having a child, your body's changed. So what turned you on and what felt good for you previously may not feel good for you now. So it's really important to figure out how your body's working, what feels good in your body, what brings you pleasure. So then you can go and communicate that to your partner.
Yeah.
And I think there's like a lot to be said about the experience and release of an orgasm, right? Like the things that your hormones can do to like relax you or ease your stress a little bit, right? Can do
absolutely
sleep.
Yeah.
Induce sleep, make you feel happier, decrease stress, act as a pain relief, like the list gives you glowing skin.
So that's why it makes so much sense for it to be part of caring for yourself. If it does all of those things, like we all take like pills and do exercise and use creams like to do all of those things, like if sexual pleasure can do that for us.
Well, a lot of people put it at the bottom of the list, and that's what I mean about making it a priority and figuring out where it sits in your priority list.
Yeah.
Because more often than not, it will go to the bottom.
Yeah.
Like for some people, a shower is non-negotiable, so that's their self-care. That's like bare minimum.
Yeah.
Like have a shower every day, great. But then what else can you do on top of that makes you feel good?
I also found it quite fascinating that from some of the answers of the questions that we asked our audience, a lot of people's responses were that they don't self-pleasure themselves, or they don't use any toys or sort of playfulness with sex with themselves or with their partner. And it just made me think, like, how do people know what they like, or how do they know what their partner likes if they're not experimenting? And do you think there's like a generational thing with who's more open to exploring things, or like is it a female thing? Are we just all feeling a bit embarrassed, or like what is it that people aren't exploring? Because I found that quite fascinating that so many people said that they'd never tried anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely becoming a lot more common, the conversation around toys and trying new things. But, again, a lot of people don't talk about it with their friends. A lot of people feel shame around it. So while while sexologists and even practitioners are working really hard to normalize the conversation around toys as a sexual aid, there is still a bit of a stigma around it. Oh, my partner doesn't do a good job, like I shouldn't use a toy because it might offend them, or there are so many mixed messages. But I think it's becoming a lot more common, and I hope that a lot of people feel like it's a fun thing to do. It's fun to experiment, it's fun to play, it's fun to try new things. If you're having the same sex every time you have sex, how boring.
I know. It's definitely fun to try new things.
Girl.
And if you're unsure of where to start, like, there are so many different websites that are less tacky than I think as well. Like the idea of going into Sexyland or like Club X, or like one of those wrong. Well, it just feels really intimidating to a lot of people. Whereas it's changed a lot in how we purchase sex toys. As online, buying anonymously. Go on, have a look. Love Honey is really good because it's very gender neutral. There's so much on there. And I often will recommend toys to my patients, and I'll just send them links. I'll be like, have a look at these, see which one you like. But even beauty websites like Adore Beauty, even Cotton On, everyone is starting to get on the sexual pleasure bandwagon and realize that sexual health is self-care, and it's just health. Really.
Yes. Yeah. Love that.
So good.
Great reminder.
Yeah, go to Adore Beauty to buy your sex toys and you get a free Tim Tam.
Love it, Tim Tam. Aleeya, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
We have had a couple of funny little interruptions with babies. My dog's been barking, but it's been so lovely to connect with you, and we really appreciate you giving us your time.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the work that you do. So thank you.